Well, welcome to today's video. I've just started a new series in Luke's Gospel. Over the last few years we've looked at different sections of Luke's Gospel, and I'm picking up where we last left off in Luke chapter 6. We're in the middle of Jesus' Sermon on the Plain, where he's talking to a whole crowd of people. Luke has written, in general, he wrote to some guy called Theophilus, and he tells us in chapter 1, verse 1 to 4, why he wrote. In verse 4 he says, "I've written so that you may know the certainty of the things you've been taught." Luke wants us to be certain about who Jesus is and about what Jesus came to do. And in this passage we see that Jesus came to turn our perceptions about how we treat the world upside down. Jesus says a whole lot of really shocking things in this passage. In some ways they are easy for us to understand, but they are incredibly hard for us to put into practice. So like with any passage, I encourage you go and pray, ask God to help you to understand what he's saying to you through his word, and then go read the passage a number of times. And I'm going to show you just how I've gone through this passage. A couple of things. As I was reading, I noticed that there are a whole lot of imperatives, a whole lot of commands that Jesus gives in this passage. So I'm going to just block them. All of these: love, do good, bless, pray for, turn, do not withhold, give, do not demand back, do to others as you would have them do to you. And then again in verse 35 they pick up again: love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them without expecting anything back. Another imperative: be merciful, just as your Father in heaven is merciful. What does that mean? Do not judge. Do not condemn. Forgive. Give. Just as you read it, those are all commands. They are imperatives. These are things that Jesus is telling his disciples to do. As this passage starts, Jesus says, he's speaking to a whole crowd, and then he says, "But to you who are listening." There's a very important thing here. That word for listen is more than just listen. It's to really hear, to listen and obey, to let what you hear impact the way you live. And Jesus is saying, now if you are one of my disciples, you need to listen to what I'm saying here, and you need to really hear me. And Jesus says some startling things. Just that first phrase, love your enemies. It's there in verse 27, but again in verse 35, love your enemies. And this idea of love comes up. Jesus tells us what we are to do. He also tells us what love isn't. In these few verses from verse 32 to 34, he's saying you aren't just to love those who will love you back. That's how sinners love. Everybody in the world will love those who will naturally love them back. We're called to love those who won't love us back. And to flesh out this idea of what it means to love your enemies, Jesus uses some more imperatives, some more commands. Do good to those who hate you. And this idea of doing comes up a number of times. Doing good. Do good to them. There in verse 35 again. So there's this idea: love your enemies, do good to them. Do good to them. And then another theme, other things we're told to do. We're told to bless. We're told to pray for. It also tells us what not to do. do not withhold. Do not demand back when we're asked. Do not condemn. Do not judge. So we're told what to do. Love your enemies, do good to them, bless them, pray for them. Also, don't hold back. Give generously. Don't demand back if somebody takes something from you. Do not condemn. This is all linking with what it means to be merciful. Do not condemn. Do not judge. So Jesus is really saying things that are startling in this passage. Love your enemies. Now, to Jesus' original hearers, they were living in a world occupied by the Roman Empire. As Luke wrote this, it was very dangerous for people to be Christians. There were lots of enemies, people who hated them because they were Christians. And I take it when Jesus is saying, love your enemies, he's talking to us too about anyone who is an enemy of God. All those people, there are many of them around you who are lovely people, your friends, your family members, your colleagues, but they don't love God. They don't know him. They aren't living for him. And Jesus is saying those people, they're enemies of God, so they are the people who you are called to love. They're the people you are called to do good to bless, to pray for. They are our enemies, as it were. And Jesus really just turning on the head the way we think in this world. We would often say, love your family, love your friends. He's saying, love your enemies. And here what's become known as the golden rule. Do to others as you would have them do to you. We tell our kids that often. Jesus is saying that's how we are to treat others. Now in this first section, so there's all these imperatives, these commands: love, do good, bless, pray, give, don't demand back, do all this stuff. But so far in this passage, there's very little motivation. But then you get to verse 35, Jesus reiterates a few of the things: love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them, without expecting anything back. Then, so here is the motivation. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful as your Father in heaven is merciful. So there's our mammoth motivation in this passage. We show this love to our enemies because we are just mimicking what God has shown to us. He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. When we were his enemies, he loved us. In Jesus, he did the ultimate good for us. He blessed us. And because that is what God our Father has done for us, that's the motivation for us to show this to others. We are just showing to others, we are just applying to others what has already been applied to us. There's also another theme that pops up a number of times, this give. Give. It will be given to you. It will be poured into your lap or given into your lap. There's this idea, as we have been given so much by God, and we are to give in return, to give to everyone who asks, to show them extravagant love. And this idea, a good measure pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap, for with the measure you use it, it will be measured to you. I take it that this is God richly blessing those who have this kind of attitude. People who show this love and who show this mercy to others. Our job is not to judge or condemn the world, but rather to show our Father's loving character, his merciful character. So as you look at this passage, what does this teach us about God? Well, it teaches us that he's kind to ungrateful and wicked people like us. He is merciful to people who were his enemies. We get the opposite of what we deserve. God is merciful to us. What does this passage show about the way God works in the world? Well, God works through us. As we show love and do good and bless and pray for our enemies, all we are doing is applying to others what God has already applied to us. God shows these things to the world through us. These are the natural overflow for those who have been made children of God. We've been shown mercy, we've been shown love, and so it flows out of us to those around us. How does this passage point to Jesus? Well, Jesus was saying these words, and a short time later, he would demonstrate exactly what this looks like. He showed us what this love for enemies really looks like as he died for our sins on the cross. He did ultimate good for those who hate him. He blessed those who were cursing him. Even on the cross, he prayed, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they are doing." Jesus showed us exactly what this means in practice. He showed us this mercy that we so desperately need. And what difference should this truth make to us? Well, this is how we are called to love and treat our enemies. Our enemies, remember, are those who are enemies of God, all those who do not live for him. We are to love them. We are to do good to them. We are to bless them. We are to pray for them. We are to show them mercy. We are to forgive them. Those are the things that should characterize the way that we interact with those around us. And we live that way because we want them to know what our Father in heaven is like. So I pray that you have a great time digging further into this passage. I hope that that helps. As I said, it's full of these imperatives, these commands. These things ought to characterize us as children of the Most High, because we are showing what our Father in heaven is like. God bless as you dig into this and as you teach it to others.